our findings and recommendations, but primarily I feel comfortable in saying that our findings and recommendations would be findings and recommendations irrespective of whether COVID had occurred or not.
No, I understand that if there's a shortcoming, the shortcoming would show up, but it's exactly as what you just explained on the homeless side. They did not have the resources to even respond efficiently to what you have identified as a recommendation issue, and as a result, I find it hard to find them responsible under those conditions when people weren't even showing up for work during these times. And I'm just trying to identify, so we now know that there's 104 at least items, and my guess is that there's more than just 104 out here. I bet you we're going to start, if you dug into this, you might find there's a whole number of these items that have a causal connection to COVID and their inability to perform, and therefore you found them with an issue of recommendation. And it just seems to me somewhat of an anomaly in this year's highlights to be finding fault with some of these groups, because there's absolutely nothing some groups could have done, I believe. And I'm not trying to
Understood.
Presuppose, but I would sure love to know of that 105, what called in that category. And then my reference to 2019 was just to try and find out, is 105 an anomaly all by itself to have that many issues? Are they usually 60, or are they usually 160 versus the 105? And so that's all I was trying to identify.
So this is not, by any statistics that I've done, but just by what I have seen here, is that we have a very diligent group of people who we audit and who monitor and do the work. Overall, the main causative thing that we always write up for findings is lack of policies and procedures. That is the majority of what we find, not that they're not doing their jobs. If they're not doing their jobs, a lot of times it can be because of lack of policies and procedures that ensure the consistency in which they do it, or a lot of it is sometimes resource-driven. But for the main part, I would say majority of ours, process and procedures. Would you guys agree? One of the main ones. But we can take a look at that. As I'm hearing you, is what you'd like to know is which of these findings have a COVID impact to them and may not have been a finding outside of that.
Sure, because they're going to read this same report. They're going to see this same information in these areas. They're going to find they got dinged. I mean,
Oh, they already know. They got
I got that. But they're getting dinged, and is it because there was a causal connection between COVID and their lack of this? Because if I'm following your logic, then you're saying that the policies and procedures are what the majority of these, or a high number of these, are dinged at. Then these same policies and procedures probably were in place in 19 and 18 and 17, and so we should see these same dings, because I can't believe that they were writing up new policies and procedures at a time when they don't have people.
That's correct. Yes, that's definitely correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Please continue.
Okay, wonderful. So with that, we will move on. Let's see where I am. So in continuing with our theme of improved efficiency, DI actually completed 92% of the 2021 approved audit plan, and the 2 audits remaining to be completed, but which had commenced, were the CCOMS and the DSAS reviews. So we had those 2 audits remaining at the end of December 31st of 2021. However, they had been started. Both of these audits were extended beyond the 2021 timeframe due to the DIA's responsiveness to the department's requests because of resource availability. So we have been trying to work very much in collaboration with the departments that need to be audited to ensure that we minimize any interruptions in their work. In addition to the actual performance of audits, DIA performs a significant amount of work in support of the audit process and the overall organizational risk continuum. We have done continuous audit follow-up process, which Josh is going to come and talk to you a little bit more about. We also this year had what we call a peer review, which is our external quality assessment. By professional standards, we are required to have that at no more than a 5-year time period. By our own audit committee's desire, we were having that at a 3-year period of time. So it was time for our 3-year period audit. We had done this 3 years prior. These items were where we received the highest overall rating in the peer review that could be received, which is generally confirms. And they also made note that we were applauded for several successful practices, one of which we talked about, the executive liaison, including the support of business operations during COVID. So they actually commended our department for the support and how we managed our audit process in order to enable the departments to fully function as best they could during COVID. So we scaled back and we really worked with the departments during COVID in order to manage the work that we needed to perform. And sometimes, like I said, not actually performing some work, which is why a lot of audits were deferred. And what we did was we took that time and we did some self-improvements, which are where some of these improvement processes came out of, like the issue tracker. So we were commended by our peers for doing that. We also revised and completed our annual risk assessment. So we did this is our 7th risk assessment. We do this annually as is required by professional standards, but it's really the lynch point, the foundation of what we do. We audit according to risk. So if the risk is highest, that's where we want to put our audit resources, is where there's the highest risk in order to provide the assurance that the risk is appropriately being mitigated. And so we audit based upon that, but our overall mandate from the audit committee is to try to cover all of our auditable population within a 5-year period, but on an annual basis, we try to cover all of our high-risk areas. And then we also provided the support to the external financial audit, significant support, as a matter of fact. And then we also managed with the identification and advisement on emerging risks. So one of the things that I do is I try to keep my hand on the pulse of the organization, and anything that I see that may be impactful from a risk perspective, like when COVID was coming down the pike and we were going to be getting the COVID money, the first CARES Act money. I digested that CARES Act as soon as it came in. I reached out to Mike Chambers as well as Executive Budish and says, these are our timelines. Are you guys on it, for us to get our money? Are you managing so that we can make sure that we're in compliance when they come audit us, because they will. And so they were doing all of that, but I kind of helped to keep my finger on the pulse to ensure that any emerging risk the organization management is aware of. So now we're going to talk about the continuous audit follow-up process, and Josh is going to discuss that with you as well as the relevant statistics.
Welcome.
Hello. There we go. All right. So, yes, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Joshua Altz. I'm the audit manager in the department. I'm here to talk about the continuous audit follow-up process, the objective of which is to ensure that management actions have been effectively implemented or that senior management has accepted the risk of not taking action. So the process itself all starts when audits are released and issues and findings are identified. Each issue is assessed a risk level based on the potential impact to the organization and the likelihood of the occurrence. The higher the impact or likelihood, the greater the risk. We use low, moderate, and high designations to categorize our risk. Like Monica mentioned, they provide management action plans, and those are developed by the auditee. They're obtained during the audit, and it's basically how the, how management plans to address the issues identified in the audit. Now, we have been tracking those now. They're added to our issue tracker spreadsheet, all the issues and the action plans. We work with our agency audit liaison, Catherine. She's been a fantastic asset in the execution of this process. She monitors those departments with audit findings and open issues on a monthly basis. She'll update us, and then eventually we'll perform follow-up testing or remediation testing. Now, with that follow-up testing, the purpose is to provide the assurance of effective implementation. The schedule itself of when we follow up is based on the initial risk identified. So the higher the risk, the more priority it takes, the less time that they have to remediate, and the more testing happens. Moderate risk, it's less than high risk, less often and less extensive, but it's more so than the lows, obviously. So we also do bi-monthly meetings with our audit liaison, discuss any open items, concerns. She updates our issue, or excuse me, we update our issue tracker and document the results. It basically allows us to, track everything to the end result of our testing, which we report semi-annually to our audit committee in June and December. So if you actually look 2 slides later on the performance statistics, you'll see a table called the 2021 Issue Tracker Summary. Right here it shows the status of our continuous monitoring for the end of 2021. So we had a grand total of 210 issues. 77 we were able to test and conclude that they were closed and remediated, which is a good thing. Of the remaining 133, only about half of them were from prior year audits. Most of them, or the other half, was from current year and 2021 released audits. So, by all means, if you have any questions, feel free.
Oh, no, we're good. The one thing I'd like to thank you is giving us the information beforehand.
Oh, sure.
I know the audit committee jumped on it pretty good, as well as my other colleagues, but Councilman Dale Miller, after pondering for the presentation, has some questions for you.
Oh,
Councilman.
absolutely.
Just one at this time, Mr. Chairman, and my question is, as part of this continuous tracking process, do you have a process where you decide that something has been sufficiently corrected that it no longer needs continuous tracking, and how do you come to that conclusion and close an item?
Sure. Yes, that's the primary objective for us, is to close items and take them off of this issue tracker. So, I mean, that's what we want to see. That means that the departments have remediated and things are running smoothly. So with that, we do the follow-up testing. That gives us, it's basically like an audit test, only it's something we've already looked at in the past. So that's all dependent upon the risk level. So if it's a high-risk item, the more testing we're going to do. And when we do see that it's remediated, we just track it on here and report it out.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just have a couple, very brief. Just with the high track, are they identified?
I'm sorry?
With the different engagements, right? You said the ones with high risk or the ones that need to be highly tracked. Are they identified? Do you have 10, 20? There's a set.
Yes,
They're
yes.
identified.
Actually, if you look at that table right there, we do have the high, moderate, and low broken out. So at the end of the year, there was 54 high-risk open issues.
Yes, by 54, but just by Children and Family Services is a high. Cuyahoga
Oh.
County Juvenile Court is a high, right? I'm just
No.
wondering, you have so many, you have the group of highs identified?
It's not the department that's identified as necessarily high, moderate, or low risk. It's more the process or the finding itself. So, if we find one process within a department that is going to have a great financial impact if controls are not implemented, then that's how we deem it.
Yeah, so I'm in my own mind, just, listening, it's, some of the departments have more risk involved than others.
Oh, sure.
But you're saying it's only the control, not the department?
Well, it's the finding itself. So if we do have a finding, then we'll look at what's the risk of that. Maybe.
Yeah. If I may clarify, so there are different areas of risk. When we're looking at who to look at, we do a risk assessment. And so all of these areas that were looked at were all high-risk areas. I don't think we got to any moderates. So all of our resources in the audit that's on here, that department was a high-risk audit that we did. And then once we look at it and we come up with findings, we then will categorize those findings into a risk category. It helps management know where to put their resources and their focus, and we give them a time frame in which we think they should remediate it based upon the risk. And it also helps us on the back end when we're following up on where we're going to put our resources to make sure that this was remediated in answer to Councilmember Miller's question. So we will test the way we would normally test anything, a high-risk thing. For moderate, it all depends. We'll do some testing. The level of testing may not be as great as a high. And then for the lower-risk ones, we may do some cursory reviews to close them out. But all of them do get closed out.
Sounds good. I look forward, because it seems, the report was completed by charter and presented well, so thank you for that. But it needs more than an hour. So as the chairman, I might come by and visit you so I can get a little more in-depth understanding of all the different realities, so I can be a little bit more
I will
specifically prepared.
definitely make sure I set up that meeting with you and you as well.
Yeah, and then overall, how are we as a Cuyahoga County enterprise in regards to the audit world nationwide?
So, let's go back one.
You can just tell us. I don't need to see it.
Okay. Well, so for us, okay, overall, from a organizational perspective, the size of the organization that we're probably on par. And this is just based upon my experience of, 30 plus years. Don't tell anybody that. But we are probably about on par what you would see with any governmental entity of this size and stature. We do have,
We're doing all right. We can do a little bit better.
absolutely.
That's all I needed to hear.
Chairman.
I think Jack was.
Yeah. On the slide that was just up there a second week ago, you had IT having 13 items on there. That's the highest of any department that you had on the high side. Obviously, the entire organization is dependent upon an efficient and effectively operating IT department. And I don't know whether all the concerns are public concerns or some of them might be confidential, but do we have an operational concern when you got 13 high items of being far in excess of any of the other departments?
Okay, so to put that in proper context, that particular one was for a specific audit that was done, and they're still working to remediate those items. But overall, that area, although it presents risk to the organization, it is not the most risky IT. Like, it would not put us in jeopardy from an IT perspective. And I'm looking for the statistics. Okay, here we go.
We have 13 at high risk, and the other departments, the next closest one is half of that.
So that was the IT inventory, and that's where we went in and we did a review of the process and procedures around their, that they have around managing their inventory. Inventory for IT overall is not I would say, a high risk, and this was done before I got here. So that IT inventory audit, like if we were to look at the current risk assessment, is more of a moderate than a high. So the audit itself is more of a moderate. The more concerning areas of IT, which I think you are concerned about, are actually going to be looked at, hopefully, by an external resource, and that's what we call our IT general controls. That audit has yet to be done. It is on our current audit plan, and that, if we had 13 in that, that was significantly high-risk areas, then you would definitely have cause for pause. But this particular type of audit, the IT inventory audit, having 13, and then the nature in which it was, is not scary, I'll say. So no, based upon this specific one, no, I wouldn't say we have operational concerns with our IT department.
Please clarify for me, what is an IT inventory item? Are we talking a hardware? Are we talking a software? Are we talking operations? Are we talking about employee usage? What is the IT inventory?
So the IT inventory review, as I understand it, as I said, it was done before I was here. It looked at things like how they manage their overall process for IT inventory for hardware. So how many servers they had on hand and whether or not they had a process to track those servers, how many PCs there were available, how they issued those PCs out, not in terms of access to the system, but just who they gave them out to and whether they could track whether they were there or not. It also looked at things like, I think it did some software where it said, did we know where our licenses, how many licenses we may have had for our software. So it looked at those types of IT inventory, and they have come a very long way in managing their inventory. But overall, that inventory, that specific scope of that work wasn't something that I would say would put us at risk, materially so.
I guess I come from a background or an operation where if I can't find and know where my PCs are in my corporation, and it registers with almost double the number of high incidents of any other department, that would scare the heck out of me, because the bad guys, if they end up with a bunch of our computers and we can't tell where they are, I'm sorry, but it strikes me as that would be something that would not be in the moderate. It would belongs in the high. It's marked as high, and I'm not sure why we're trying to dilute that.
Well, we would have to look at that individual report and look at those individual items in order to put it in proper context. I was just saying that in terms of whether or not operationally IT is in a bad position, it's hard to make that determination based upon the level, the number of issues or concerns that came out of this specific.
I'm just reading your report, and it goes low, moderate, and high.
Right.
IT is rated twice as many high as any other department that you've reviewed. That, if they were over in the low, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If we were in the moderate, I wouldn't be having it. It's that you've got somebody in your audit has rated our IT, and so to me, when IT can't identify inventory, that's why I was going down systematically to try and identify what inventory you're talking about. If they can't identify where their inventory is and whether their servers are up and running, and whether it just...
I'm not sure that those were the specific items that were rated or had the problem. Like, I do know, I remember, again, I wasn't here, but I was on the tail end of when they were wrapping this up when I came in. One of the things I do remember was stuff like there was an area downstairs in the basement where they kept the inventory, and that wasn't secured properly. There was also an issue related to the dock area, which I think still remains an issue. Is that correct, Catherine? That dock issue?
I'm not getting more warm and fuzzy as you're describing.
So, and so on a couple of the items, so some of the ones that I know, for instance, is, it's not that,
I'm
sorry,
I'm not
Catherine.
sharing this, but
Yeah.
you need to put your name on the record, sorry.
Yep, Catherine Tkachuk, so Chief Innovation and Performance Officer. So some of the items that were in the IT wasn't that we couldn't necessarily always find things. For instance, there could be our inventory wasn't kept up to date. So the person that the computer was assigned to may not have been updated in the inventory system because that it was still in HHS, but if somebody moved, well, not HHS because that's a state, but it was still in, say, the Office of Innovation, but we had moved it to people. So there were some things around that, but they do have a number of processes in place that lock down their computers. Again, if it's not connected to the network, it basically, within a certain time period, becomes bricked. You have to connect it for updates. They have a number of security features in place that stop anyone from accessing the computer, and I think that's what Monica was saying. Well, there were certainly some inventory issues. It wasn't necessarily that we were seeing people not or able to access our devices in those cases. And they do have a number of other tools that they use to address some of those. However, I will say, so this audit came out, I think it was end of 2019, and they put in a number of different processes as a result of this audit, which actually was very helpful in them during the pandemic when they had to issue out approximately, I think, 1,000 laptops. They had already started building those. I think where they're getting caught up on some of it is still building the correct policies and procedures to follow up on some of those. So that's part of where they're still finalizing and putting some the actual policies and procedures and checklists in place for those processes that they developed and used during the pandemic as they were issuing out. I want to say it was something around 1,000 laptops to go to work from home for a lot of folks.
And I get that. I understand that people work from home, we would have issued the laptops. That's very much in keeping with what everybody was doing that time. But if you're telling me that we have an inventory problem, and this says 2021, this doesn't say 2019.
Well, so this is these were open audits, these were ones with open issues in 2021. So again, sometimes it's if it hasn't been reviewed or updated, but it's not, the audit was conducted in 2019.
Okay.
So so again, and I think IT is they're still fixing some, and I think we're going to actually have a review of the new ones in the next quarter. They're set up for audit to review and make sure that they've fixed them appropriately as well, and that's a part of their priority focus for it, is to make sure that they're all fixed according to audit standard and will be reviewed next quarter.
Yeah, well, my fiduciary, as our fiduciary responsibilities are up here, if we've got laptops floating around with Health and Human Service information, even though they claim you cannot access it, trust me, the bad guys can access that computer somehow. So I'm just concerned if our inventory is chalking up as a high level, I'd love to get an update as far as where that 13 is today, and get an update on that, because the bad guys are relentless. We know that. And to get access to important stuff like Health and Human Service records and things of that nature, it would be scares the heck out of me if we can't find these laptops.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Miller? Thank you, Catherine, our director.
So, Mr. Chairman, to Ms. Houston, what do you see as the biggest risks going forward that you're aware of, and what are going to be the highlights of your audit program over the coming year?
The biggest one is Councilmember Schron's, what he just talked about, IT. Since I came on board, I've been pushing us getting a good look at our IT where it does show the concerns, which is what we call our IT general controls. That's going to look at multitude of areas. It starts with our governance processes. It goes all the way down to looking at access rights, backup and recoveries. These are things that we're going to be looking at in our review that is done. It's called the General IT Controls Review, specific IT controls that should be in place in order to ensure the effectiveness, efficiency of operations, but more importantly, the security of our systems. So that's your concern, and that will be looked at in that review. So that's going to be a highlight. Another risk area for the organization, obviously, is the COVID impact and the use of the funds. We continually are looked at by the state auditors, and we get emails from them. And when they see things in the newspaper about how we're spending our money, and to ensure that we're in compliance with the legislation. So that's definitely a high area of risk, which I think we have under control, but it's yet to be seen until it gets audited. We also have some high risk in the area of coming down from a financial reporting perspective. There's a GASB for the financial statements where we have to do leases, and right behind that is software. So we have to comply with that. The fiscal team is working to try to get compliance with that. We have to be in compliance with that this year. And so that takes a lot of resources. We have a lot of leases that we have to look at to know whether or not we need to put those on our books or not, and how we need to characterize us. So that's another important area of risk. And then, for our 2022 audit plan, I actually have, we're going to be looking at this is a huge one. We're just talking about this, resources. The personnel risk to the organization is huge for many reasons. The rate of retention, we are losing employees at a high rate, as are other people. The inability to recruit as rapidly as we need to fill spaces definitely brings upon risk to the organization. So we are going to be looking at, and currently have started that review of employee recruitment, hiring, and retention assessment. That's going to be kind of a different project that we do. It's not going to be an audit. It's going to be more of consulting to help them identify best practices, ensure that they are using those best practices and doing everything that they can do to try to get the resources that we need here, qualified resources that we need here in order to do the work. Obviously, if there's not a person in that seat to do the work and it needs to be done and it's not done, it presents risk to the organization.
So it sounds like your concept of risk is not limited to financial risks.
Absolutely not.
It goes on to overall performance risks.
Right. From professional standards practice perspective, we look at what we call the tabular approach, which is the table, which is strategy, compliance, financial, and operational risk. So those are the 4 areas that we look at.
My other question is looking 5 to 10 years down the road. What things can you see on the horizon that are not major risks at this time, but that you think might become significant risks farther down the road if we don't pay attention to them?
Wow.
He's good at throwing off
Yeah.
the wall one on occasion.
It's a risk now, but it's going to get worse as we look at it now, and that is the human resource issue. We really, as governments, will have to change our culture and how we operate in order to really attract and retain the generationals, the millennials, and the different segments of the population that come, and how we address that issue. They have different thoughts and mindset about how they work, and whether or not the operations, the practices, the policies that we have here that make up our culture, whether that fits and meshes with their thought of where they want to work. So that's, definitely the human resource, and there's just less people. Baby boomers are going to retire, definitely. My generation, I'm sure, going to retire. I don't know about y'all, but I'm sure going to retire in a couple of years. And so that's going to be huge. The the drain on resources. And if we don't start addressing that now, we're going to even be that much further behind later. So definitely, I would say that one. And then just taxpayer base is definitely going to be one in which, how do you get more money coming in to support the resources and services that you need? It's current an issue, but it's just going to be exacerbated, I think, in the future.
So, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Houston, there's certainly a lot of risks out there related to the jail.
Yes.
Does your office get involved in any of that?
Yes, we do to a certain extent. It comes up as a high on our risk assessment.
That's no surprise.
Every year. However, because there are current activity, current eyes on that externally by multiple entities, our department does not devote resources to it at this time, but it will continue or remain as a high-risk item. And at any point in time where there's not appropriate attention being given to it, we will provide the assurance that we think is needed to this organization as it results in that. So definitely, yes, risk around that and how you operate those jails efficiently is definitely something that is a concern, and you guys have your hands full. I try to keep abreast of what's going on and trying to find somewhere to put that jail, and it's definitely something that has to be addressed, and it is a risk.
So I'll ask one more question. You mentioned strategy, operations, compliance, and finances as four big buckets. Could you give a few examples of the kind of things you might look at under strategy?
So under strategy, we look at if a department, and we do this now kind of part of, when we go in, are there any strategic goals set for that area? And how do those strategic goals align with the ones set for the organization? Let's take HHS and we look at the Department of Family and Children's Services. If we go there, we say, okay, well, what is the overall strategy as it relates to that particular organization? What is it that they're trying to do, and how are they trying to accomplish it? And then do the processes and procedures, which we're looking at and auditing, how do those processes and procedures support that strategy? Do they have the appropriate indicators or KPIs, which we're going to talk about some of our KPIs, how we as internal audit ensure we stay true to our strategic vision and strategy. You have to manage by KPIs as much as possible. So do you have the appropriate data points being fed?
What are those?
Key performance indexes.
Okay.
So we have them in audit. We established them. I was going to talk a little bit about them for audit, but that should be in every part of our organization in order to ensure that we are measuring up. So, the strategy or the vision should be being set by the executive team, and that should kind of flow its way down into everybody's performance measurements. So that's another area when we look at, how are people managing the expectation? How's that flowing into their performance management strategy? Do we even have a performance management process in place? I will tell you that we don't have a one here at the Cuyahoga County, not one that's consistent amongst the organization.
Moment in time.
At this moment in time, that is correct. So things like that is what I would look at when we're auditing and looking, and we're incorporating strategy into our strategic risk into our process.
Mr. Chairman, to Ms. Houston, I'm going to put out two other things about strategy just to put on your radar screen for you to think about. And one is incarcerating too many people. People don't come out of jail better off than they go in, and it's impacting both the workforce and the demand for services, and it's just going to continue to do so. And And the second thing I would put on your radar screen is climate change. It's only going to get worse, and the impacts are going to be significant. And I think we've been fortunate so far that to be less impacted than some other areas of the country and the world, but it doesn't mean we're not going to be impacted. We are, and it's going to be significant. So I just put those two things out there for you to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
I have one
Always time for the chairman of economic development and my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because you've opened the risk assessment based on resources of human resources, and I agree with you 100%, one of our colleagues who sits right there has been advocating for at least 5, 6 years, 7 years, that we should be looking at a buyout. You brought it up as a risk. There's always the flip side of the equation, which is the reward. We are down about 15%, I think, maybe a little bit more than that, of workforce. And that is millions and millions and millions of dollars of economic value. We just got finished with a $35 million ERP package, which was designed to help make operations more efficient. Are you also going to look at the possibility that this could be a reward and not necessarily a negative if the resources are not there? Because the buyout that our Councilman Gallagher has been advocating would be putting us into those same kind of 15% numbers. So with the expectation that we would have reduced the workforce by 700, 800, 900, maybe even 1,000 people. This would actually could turn out to be a reward with that amount of money that's available to be putting back into technology and certainly ERP. Will you be also looking at it from the reward side, not just the risk side?
So that is beyond the scope. We have limited resources. So we're looking really now at the risk and how it's impacting us currently. Definitely we will look at technology to the extent it's a solution. So our recommendations may be based on technology if we find that the standards out there involve technology, which I'm pretty sure they do. I think one of our team members has been already doing a lot of research in terms of best practices and has some information relative that I know that technology helps in that regard. And so I would fully expect some of the recommendations come out would be on definitely geared towards technology, but we won't be looking specifically at how like maybe ERP has saved us any money in that regard. But we definitely will be looking and probably will have some recommendations that are on the technological side of things on how we can better improve the workflow that is done. Because, people sometimes, the manual processes is a lot of work to do. And if they can go somewhere else where technology is better and they can focus on something different and not, spend all day long pushing paper, but can actually push a button and then focus on increasing their knowledge base somewhere else that helps them become a better and more marketable person, then they're going to go to that job there versus staying here pushing the paper. So I'm fully expecting that some of that will come out in our recommendations.
We've clearly spent $35 million to improve the processes here in the county. Not put that to work right now at a perfect time. We almost have a perfect storm where workforce is down, productivity tool is in place. It just seems to me that it would not necessarily come out as a negative. I mean, there's not another business that any of us have done that looks exactly like it did 10, 15 years ago. Go to banking, it looks different. Go to there doesn't even exist a video store anymore. We download our apps tonight.
Everything's downloaded, yeah.
We need to actually look into we can't use 10 years ago standard for a risk for the county. We need to look at.
Oh, we're definitely not. We're looking at what's happening now, what the risk is now, and what the solutions are now, what other people out there in the industry are doing to address some of these things, and trying to make sure, to the extent that we're not doing those things, we may be doing them. And it's just to check the box. When I say check the box, meaning, hey, great, you're doing that, that's the best you can do. But then it may be, hey, you're doing this, but this new technology is available, or this new practice is something you should consider, and in order to beef up, your ability to attract and retain professionals.
I just think we're at a crossroads of potentially doing some big things.
Yeah, we are.
Half of the
It's a
taxpayers.
great time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great opportunities.
Great
Well, I can't Thank you
opportunities.
enough for your presentation, you and your team. I appreciate it. Look forward to updating myself pretty soon. It's your convenience. We'll let me know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
Yeah,
thank you, and
I
you
thank
can
you.
go out, you can
Okay.
get out of here.
Wonderful, thank you. Appreciate it.
Madam Clerk, is there any miscellaneous, any miscellaneous business? None? Well, this meeting stands adjourned. Oh, where's your gavel? Gavel's over there.